Hi, I'm Fahmidul Haq, visiting professor at Bard College, New York, with Professor Joshua Glick. The topic is relationship of artificial intelligence with media, especially in the contemporary times. So I should introduce Professor Joshua first. He's a visiting associate professor of film and electronic arts at Bard College. He is a film and media studies scholar focusing on the comparative histories of film, television, and radio. Also nonfiction media, race and representation, and the civic use of emerging technology. He's the author of Los Angeles documentary and the production of public history, which was published in 2018 from University of California Press. His articles and reviews have appeared in Film History, World Records, Film Quarterly, Jump Cut, and some other journals. He, in collaboration with the Center for Advanced Virtuality at MIT, he designed the interactive online curriculum, Media Literacy in the Age of Deepfakes. Professor Glick also co-curated Deepfake Unstable Evidence on Screen, an exhibition at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York. And I am waiting to have a great conversation with Professor Joshua Glick. Welcome to this conversation.
It's great to be here. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Josh. Professor Josh, would you please give us some primary overview regarding how artificial intelligence is shaping the nature of media, especially in contemporary time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's reshaping it in a number of ways. I know we're going to sort of get into some of the specifics, but AI is having a major impact on, say, contemporary Hollywood, mainstream film and television. It's having an impact on how artists are sort of working with media in a variety of ways in kind of installation context, as well as for amateur sort of media makers and fan art and things like that. There's a kind of civic potential, a kind of socially engaged potential for how AI tools can be used by documentary filmmakers, by nonprofits, in say human rights context, things like that. AI tools, apps, platforms can be used by malicious actors for some really damaging sort of applications and uses as well. And I know we might get into that, but there are some very sort of negative and sort of deleterious effects of how AI can be used and the ways in which it can cause harm.
We have been working on deepfake for a long time, and your curriculum in the MIT project is also focusing on deepfake. Deepfake, we can sense that it's something fake is going on there. So on the other hand, in the digital platforms, we see misinformation, fake news. So how is it different from disinformation or misinformation?
Yeah, so I mean, just to clarify, I mean that term, sort of deep fake, it involves deep learning, as well as that gesture towards what is fake, what is artificial, and deep fake videos are really those videos that depict people doing or saying things that they never actually did or said, or doing or saying things without their consent. There are, many kinds of deep fakes that are forms of dis and misinformation, right? I mean, dis and misinformation are, it's a large field. I mean, for disinformation tends to be the more kind of malicious and sort of intentionally damaging, form of media. Where it's the intention to deceive, to manipulate, and a lot of deep fakes can try, have that purpose, or that aim. And we can sort of give some examples, whether it's things like, non-consensual deep fake pornography, which still exists on the internet, whether it's the kind of forms of consequential confusion, right, that sort of deep fakes, in existence can cause. But also, there are forms of say deepfake or this kind of AI enabled media that can have alternative uses and applications. And some artists and some media makers and filmmakers have sort of gravitated towards that term, or trying to sort of use this technology towards other things, whether it's say for entertainment or even for some civic uses as well.
So I'm picking one definition from your curriculum, MIT curriculum. Deepfakes use AI tools to simulate people doing or saying things they never did or said, or appearing in fabricated situations without their consent. So I can sense there is kind of ethical issue here, right, for deepfake. At the same time, this synthetic media can be used for say civic use. So there is a where is the line of this unethical thing and this civic use?
Right.
And also I can connect this question with that very idea of unethical AI, because we have been seeing that in digital platforms, AI is being used for surveilling people, their activities, and these data are gathered and shared with the advertisers so that they can earn money by surveilling.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, ethics and AI. I mean, it's a critical issue. I mean, these topics are definitely hotly debated right now. I mean, just very very quickly. I mean, the kind of unethical sort of uses of AI, say in the context of a deepfake, tend to involve people's sort of likeness being taken from them without their consent, right? And then sort of used or manipulated in a particular way, right? To defame that person, to maim, to embarrass, to ridicule, right? Like in the example of non-consensual deepfake pornography, right? Where it is a kind of online violence that has a kind of real world consequence. And consent and disclosure are often not part of those works of media. We could perhaps think of a deepfake that tried to have a kind of malicious outcome. Thinking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and a deepfake of President Zelensky that was released, right? I mean, saying, depicting him, encouraging people to sort of put down their weapons, sort of announcing a kind of defeat. I mean, this was something that was aimed, or that they wanted, that the Russian government wanted to have a kind of negative outcome. I mean, it's the kind of video that he, of course, did not consent to or give permission for. I mean, so this kind of range of deepfakes are out there, can be made. They're a kind of threat. But then the more kind of ethical sort of uses of synthetic media might involve some of those same technologies, but towards just something very, very different. So taking a public figure, I don't know, like somebody like Nicolas Cage, and sort of face swapping him onto people's beloved superheroes across very different films. A kind of fan art, right, of a sort of public persona. I mean,
Nicolas Cage case, he never acted for that film, but his face was used, right?
Yeah. So for these kinds of examples of sort of face swaps, right? I mean,
also, it can be the malicious use of this kind of deepfakes can be used before the election to confuse people, to create some fabricated narratives, right? With their face.
I mean, so this is this is the threat, right? I mean, part of the initial sort of discussion, buzz, a lot of sort of sensational articles in the mainstream and in popular press around 2017, 2018, 2019 about deepfakes, and people were very worried about this, right? That there could be a deepfake, released around the time of an election that could cause great confusion, even if it was debunked at a later moment or even immediately. That kind of deepfake hasn't really caused that kind of confusion, on that scale. People were worrying about the election in the U.S., right, and involving Trump, and whether the kind of strategically deployed deepfake could have that kind of negative resonance. Part of the reason for this, for deepfakes not having that kind of impact has just been because of the effectiveness of legacy forms of fake news and disinformation, right? It's just not that difficult to fabricate captions, right? I mean, to Photoshop things, to take things in one context and put it into another in ways that cause confusion, in ways that lie, in ways that deceive. These forms of media, whether it's a kind of photo spread or fake headline or things like that, that very easily circulate across social media. These have been proven, to be pretty effective in terms of causing that kind of confusion, in terms of, creating these kind of information silos. And so the need for, say, a much more high quality, labor intensive, resource intensive form of media like a deepfake, there just hasn't been really the kind of need for it or their desire for it in terms of having these kinds of intended effects. That's not to say it can't happen in the future. And one of the things that people are still worried about is just the fact that deepfakes exist, right? The fact that this technology is out there, can cause a kind of confusion, right, in and of itself, to encourage people to become more skeptical of what they're seeing and hearing, or even lead to a figure in power, a politician, just sort of saying, oh, well, that's just a deep fake, right? I mean, that that didn't really happen, right? I mean, the ways in which it could allow somebody to avoid responsibility for their actions, right? I mean, these threats exist because of the fact of this technology really being out there, some regulations, but not many, right? And so just that threat is something that people are tend to be quite worried about.
So true stories and facts are in question now, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, under attack, right? But also, I mean, it's never been a time where there's been greater need, for clear-sighted, hard-hitting journalism, right? Where like there is a social reality to engage with, to be reported on. That's quite urgent, right? So the sort of flip side of the existence of deepfakes and forms of fake news and disinformation is, we need great works of documentary, we need credible journalism, we need credible sources and platforms that want to fund it and back it, right? Because the sort of future of civil society institutions, and democratic processes really depend on them.
So there are other alternative stories that is also almost opposite, coming from the opposite side, the use of deepfake and everything for civic use, of civic purpose, right? So we'll come back to that discussion, but before that, let's focus on the film industry, the studios, what is going on there. Especially, we have been hearing about the special effects and the use of VFX, which is being widely used, and the Marvel universe created on technology and everything. But what else are going on, especially in the production phase, also in the marketing and research phase? You can discuss in those.
I mean, so there's a number of things, right? I mean, just in terms of, say, the kind of craft, right, and sort of VFX craft in mainstream Hollywood, in the Marvel films. I mean, there's say like the kind of use of AI to craft more realistic faces, to de-age, just in the kind of sculpting and creating of humans or non-human forms, on screen. And this is, I mean, it's really a kind, excuse me, emerging out of a kind of long pursuit of realism, of creating digital humans, within a tradition, I mean, would involve older technologies and things like motion capture and CGI and things like that. But for example, in Infinity War, I mean, that Marvel film, the sort of sculpting of the Thanos face, I mean, involved sort of AI, right? So the figure we see involved many different sort of processes coming together to sort of data mine a tremendous amount of images of the actor, of sort of combining that with motion capture, with being able to sort of ultimately craft a face and kind of motion within the face that didn't look like a kind of alien force or a kind of stilted motion, but something very sort of flexible and agile. There's also, as I mentioned, de-aging, or even the kind of bringing, a character or, an actor, I should say, that has, since, been dead, deceased, sort of brought back to life. They should have sort of synthetic resurrection, on screen for a role. And I know, the Star Wars series has been very involved in that. Specifically for, say, issues of synthetic resurrection or de-aging, I mean, these are things that people debate, right? I mean, should we just get like to cast a younger actor or actress in that role? Or is it even, ethical to bring, an actor back, from the dead for a role, even with the consent, say, of their estate? Some people think it is just plain creepy. Some people think there's a real kind of ethical violation. Some people think this is, the expansion of, what's available to artists, right? I mean, to tell stories. So there are these things happening, sort of just like in the kind of workflow of production of Hollywood. But I should say, maybe the broader issue of AI, how sort of artificial intelligence is being used in, say, the pre-production process and things like that. Yes, I mean, we've seen the rise of, a number of, call them, consulting firms or organizations that are
also some softwares.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that use software to sort of look to the past of motion picture history, assess what kinds of films have been popular, to ultimately assess the present and future of what kind of film with particular actors in a particular genre and a particular plot arc will hit big in the box office, right? The sort of field of predictive analytics, that use algorithms to try to assess what project, or to make the recommendation, what projects to greenlight and who to greenlight and who to cast or not to cast. So a company like Civic is one example here. I should say that, look, I mean, Hollywood's desire to manage risk, to want to turn a huge profit, knowing that if they invest a certain amount of money, like an even larger amount is going to come out on the other side. I mean, this is nothing new to Hollywood, and even, say, the use of big data. I think what people are, I should say, from Hollywood's own perspective, I mean, what they're excited about is this is a new constellation of tools to help manage that risk to an even greater degree, to earn even more money. Also, there is, what they say is, the interest or the excitement in finding projects that, one wouldn't think would be popular, that actually potentially could be, right? To find sort of hidden potential in various places by sort of automating certain processes and using the kind of mining of big data in order to do it. I should say that one of the real hesitations here, one of just the flat out critiques, is that a lot of these the sort of processes that I just described by the organizations that I just described, places like Civic, they're really looking to the past, of what has been successful, what has been popular, and to sort of look through the lens of, financial success, right? I mean, they're looking through a very, ultimately a kind of narrow lens. And so, people sort of looking at that process could say, look, this is going to always be a kind of inherently conservative, inherently narrow form of deciding what to greenlight, deciding what films to make. Yeah.
One question comes to my mind in this stage of discussion, that this big data ensures the success of the film, or or they are like safeguards for the studio. But what about new ideas?
Sure, yeah.
You are like reproducing the same thing, but the new independent directors or with new artistic hunches, people come forward with new stories, right? And also,
sure, yeah.
the society has been transforming slowly or rapidly, so there must be some new ideas. What about that possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, even though one could say that, you know, the script that is being generated, or this kind of sort of alchemy of looking to the past, I mean, ultimately generates something, you know, fresh and exciting for audiences. You know, it doesn't account for the kinds of creative risks, the kinds
Yeah.
of sort of ambition of fresh ideas that are risky, that might not be financially successful, but might be important.
Yeah.
And you know, those stories should be told too, right? You know, the films that might involve the casting of, you know, people of color, marginalized communities, subjects that might not be, you know, for as wide an audience as possible. You know, these are the kinds of things that will be sort of, you know, de-emphasized, you know, by a lot of these algorithms and those sort of AI driven processes. And so, you know, there is that narrowness that needs to be reckoned with and critiqued. And then also, you know, what you're saying about the need to account for just what is happening in the world, right? As sort of driving a kind of interest in both just what could be successful, what could be an, you know, an appealing film,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening just like at the moment, you know, that a film is being imagined, but also, you know, there's a kind of social relevance, a kind of social importance to that project and how it's able to connect and engage with, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just things happening on a local or global level.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I mean, it's you know, those are the kinds of things that, you know, these algorithms, you know, struggle with big time, but that, you know, human voice, vision, the curatorial eye, decision making processes, you know, are great for accounting for. And so, you know, this is, I mean, it's both the kind of anxiety and also the sort of need to have, you know, sort of individuals with vision, with, you know, sort of social purpose and urgency, you know, being
Mm-hmm.
involved in these processes, which, you know, are at times often at odds, especially in the Hollywood context, with
Yeah.
just this relentless drive, you know, for profit.
So is it happening only for the studios or also for the streaming platforms? Because
Yeah.
what we are discussing here for fresh ideas and new people, they were getting some scopes or options to tell their stories in streaming platforms. But is it going to limit the possibilities of streaming platforms too?
Yeah, I mean, so this is, I mean, this is an important discussion point. I mean, in the one sense, like, you know, AI has been at the very center, you know, of how, say, Netflix has, you know, done business, right? And sort of assessing like what's possible, what's out there. I mean, what's ultimately going to be of interest, right, to audiences, and sort of using the mining of big data to do it, and
Mm-hmm.
at, you know, to sort of focus on a granular level of what, you know, based on Josh Glick's past, you know, habits, rituals, you know, late night binges, you know, whatever online, you know, what kind of films might then, you know, be of interest for me to watch. And the sort of tendency of you know, this of these practices, you know, yield things that I've also, you know, that I've just mentioned, right? I mean, there's just going to be many different kinds of films, formally, stylistically, in terms of subject matter, that, you know, these major, you know, mainstream stream platforms just kind of leave out or are, you know, not interested in. Um, and you know, at the same time, there's been a kind of challenge or a kind of sort of counterweight or a kind of alternative sort of movement for some of, you know, other platforms like, I don't know, you know, Ovid.tv or, you know, Movie or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
that they boast and they really flaunt the, you know, the notion that, you know, what exists on their platform are curated, you know, projects by individuals, right? I mean, that's really what's driving the things that you see are, you know, the kind of human made decisions of curation, right? Of deciding about the artistic importance or the social relevance of a particular film that's acquired and, you know, placed on a platform, you know, in front of people to look at. So there has been, you know, that kind of counterweight too. I mean, it's true that in, say, like the long 2010s, right? I mean, the past sort of 10 years, as all of these platforms were growing, as they were, you know, expanding, as they were trying to attract eyeballs, there was a kind of, productive messiness, I suppose you could say, in terms of how they were doing business, of how they were trying to acquire and sign just such a tremendous, breadth of projects. It really did create some opportunities for filmmakers, some, on a select level, filmmakers of color and women, and marginalized communities, to be able to make projects, people that had a difficult time finding a way to make films in, broadcast television or the commercial sort of, legacy studios. And a lot of these streaming services created a kind of, space for them, over, say, the past 10 plus years. However, now, as we're sort of moving towards, I think, a period of consolidation in the media industries, a kind of downsizing of content. I mean, I worry, right, that, for a lot of those platforms, they're only going to become a bit more narrow, a bit more controlled in terms of, excuse me, the kinds of films they make. I mean, we see this right now happening with the sort of like HBO, Discovery, Warner, Behemoth, and even with Netflix and Disney Plus and places like that. They're actually becoming a bit more narrow as they sort of limit the amount of films that they are putting into production and hosting.
Okay. Now we want to come back to that discussion, the civic use of AI and deepfake. Could you please extend this discussion with those two documentaries? Actually, I came to know from you that those two documentaries, Welcome to Chechnya, HBO documentary, and also in event of moon disaster.
Oh, sure.
So would you please briefly describe those two documentaries and how the civic use of AI was used in these two documentaries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so, these are very different projects, I should say, but sort of within this realm of say, engaging with ideas about nonfiction, of working with nonfiction. I mean, I think in a case like Welcome to Chechnya, it is very much a documentary. I mean, it's a social documentary, a human rights documentary, a film about the oppressed LGBTQ community in Chechnya, and sort of efforts to get particular members of that community under threats of violence to a safe place, and essentially the way in which synthetic media, AI enabled media sort of works in that film is Ryan Laney, the sort of brilliant effects supervisor that created what he called a kind of digital veil that worked, or served as a kind of mask, in some sense, a kind of form of identity protection to those individuals that appear in the film, because revealing their identity would put them in directly into harm's way. But at the same time, it's not a kind of mask that scrambles their face or or something like that. It allows them to emote. I mean, it's a human sort of deep faked face that allows them to emote, to express themselves, to be able to connect with audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so that that's essentially how the sort of synthetic media sort of works in the context of that film, which sort of unfolds very much like a social documentary, but the technology is not meant to deceive, it's not meant to manipulate. There's a kind of signaling, or I should say like a very sort of overt foregrounded form of communication to the viewer in the beginning that this technology is being put to use. And then throughout the film, Laney and I should say, Ryan Laney saw what he was doing as a kind of signaling to viewers, that there was some, alteration that took place by some, what he called kind of after blur between the head and neck. So some, slight indications that, what we were seeing was a digitally altered face.
Mm-hmm. And also,
and so yes.
In event of the
in event of moon disaster, yeah.
So the speech of the President Nixon,
yeah,
has been altered. What happened?
Right. So so this is it's a very different kind of project. I would not call it maybe like a social documentary, but maybe a kind of like deepfake art installation. And this is a project that has existed in or been shown in different contexts, in film festival contexts, in gallery spaces, in museum spaces, and is essentially a kind of reimagining of the Apollo 11 mission as if it had been a failure, right? So as if the U.S. didn't land on the moon, but in fact that mission had been a failure. There was a kind of crash landing, and what we see, and in the context in which how it's installed, is a kind of period living room in the late 1960s that you sort of sit down on a couch and you're watching the television. It's almost like a newscast that's unfolding. And for that film, there is a lot of actual nonfiction, news footage from the time that's been sort of reordered, resequenced to appear quite striking and real. And the directors of the film, Francesca Panetta, Halsey Bergen, were sort of very conscious of that kind of artful sort of reordering of images that lead you into what was an actual speech that President Nixon's administration had prepared in case the moon landing failed, and that speech was on deck in case he had to read it. And in the context of this deepfaked, this deepfake art installation, this synthetic Nixon, the deepfake Nixon reads this speech, this sort of very moving speech about how it was a failure, but the sort of spirit of the mission will live on, and their deaths are not in vain. Now, you might be listening to this and saying, what, like that sounds misleading, that sounds deceptive. And I should say, a couple of things to that point. That on the one hand, the installation is intended as a kind of warning, to viewers about how this deepfake technology, how mass communication technologies can be used for all kinds of purposes, can reorder, elements of history, can engage with the past and reorder things in deceptive ways. And in the context of this installation, there is ample context provided, sort of telling viewers and visitors exactly, essentially,
I'd like
what
to
is going on.
read out something from your curriculum. The directors were quoted like this: "We believe information presented not true is an artistic and educational context is not misinformation. It has the potential to stay with viewers and make them more wary about what they see in the future." So it's like a precaution to the audience that what can be done. So the false can be true and true can be false if this can be used in that manner.
Yeah, I mean, it could be potentially very confusing, which is why there's a lot of thinking through about the context in which it's installed, and part of the installation involves a reveal of how it was made, of the processes that came together, how the synthetic Nixon what was created through the use of a voice actor, and what footage of Nixon was from his resignation speech, as well as a lot of other speeches the AI was trained on. So that reveal component is a way of demystifying, is a way of explaining to people how this installation was put together. So this sort of educational dimension, I think, really comes out in that combination of seeing that video in that seat, and then understanding how it was created, how these technologies were used, and then thinking more broadly about other applications, other uses of these technologies. So in the online curriculum that I designed, for example, there's a part of it that focuses on an event of moon disaster, and one of the sample assignments that I created for that was, okay, here's an example of this work of sort of deepfake media, right? Apollo 11 mission didn't happen. How might one research and construct a credible account of that moon landing, right? What sources would you go to? How would you research that? And I sort of outline the kinds of steps for how to sort of research that project, how, what sources to look towards, what archives, contain, valuable evidence to allow students to be able to construct a kind of credible narrative, drawing on evidence about the Apollo 11 moon landing.
Yeah, and our concern is how to prevent this unethical use of AI. So what can be done in this regard? It's quite complex. The boundary is not very distinct, but if it is the malicious use of AI, what can be done? Like some ideas are there, like digital forensic and content moderation by the social media platforms, and policy initiatives taken by the governments. So what are these ideas to protect malicious media?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple levels of responsibility and accountability. Like I don't think that there's one necessary or simple solution. So I do think it's beneficial, especially this is how we think through things in this sort of liberal arts context or in our classrooms, right? On the one level, like there are there are things that individuals can do, right? I don't think this is where the conversation ends. Excuse me. Or this is the only solution, or it's on each individual to combat or to stop misinformation or to decipher credible from not credible sources. But I do think some media literacy training in civics classes and media studies classes I think is helpful. So learning tips and techniques and strategies for understanding how to look for credible sources, how to understand questions of authorship, how to cross-reference sources, how to essentially read with and look and listen with a very critical eye and ear about the kinds of media we engage with on an everyday basis, and how to detect, or at least how to be appropriately critical of media on the one hand, and then also where to look, what sources to engage with for credible information. So I think there are there are some things that just individuals we can do. There are giveaways, I suppose, for a lot of poorly made deep fakes. I mean, they're getting better and better all the time, but it's always, I think, good just to sort of be aware of the kinds of tells or signals that are out there for poorly made deep fakes, whether it's unusual lighting on the skin, or sort of disjointed movement between the head and neck, things like that. But beyond that, I think there's there are major things that can be done at the level of say content moderation by platforms, being sort of forced to to make this a sort of human-led endeavor, right? That they're hiring for it, they're staffing up to think deeply about how to do content moderation and create some hard boundaries between what can be placed on the platform and what can't. I believe that platforms have a major role to play in the kinds of information and media that's out there, right? The fact that they are just passively sort of hosting different kinds of things and aren't really responsible in the ways that publications are responsible, are things that I mean, this is just something I don't agree with, and we'll sort of look for opportunities and ways to to put pressure on these companies, or even just on the sort of national conversation or global conversation, to really sort of shift that kind of thinking and shift that framework. At the same time, there can be sort of policy measures in place to both limit or outlaw certain kinds of deep fakes, as well as putting more pressure on these companies, whether it's social media companies or other kinds of media platforms, to really be responsible and accountable for for the kinds of media that they host. And that moves beyond just things like non-consensual deepfake pornography. That can be more involved in deplatforming certain voices, of eliminating hate speech, of being more vigilant concerning what lives on the platform and what doesn't. And so, the more you kind of scale up and think about the role to play of these platforms and policy, that's definitely a conversation that people are having. There are also things like digital forensics and tools, and this is the kind of context that's more perhaps relevant for journalists, for certain kinds of, say, professional writers or nonprofits or human rights organizations, ways to be able to trace media that's out there, ways to both detect things that have been manipulated or altered, but also ways to watermark or stamp certain kinds of media that's created with the kind of brand of authenticity, and a sort of way to signal to viewers the kind of status or the genre, or what has or has not been done to that media. And I don't think it's realistic to think that just everyday citizens are gonna be cross-referencing every single piece of media that they look to, and running it through these apps, or trying to sort of do the sleuthing to detect how it's been altered over the course of its life. But certainly I think a tool for people doing very critical forms of reporting, and for human rights organizations and things like that, I think it can be very important.
Yeah, for news industry, in the time of post-truth and fake news, they have developed kind of fact-checking phenomenon, and also their professional fact-checkers. So something to be done here. The idea of digital forensic is, I think, coming from that perspective. It was a great discussion, Josh. We tried to define what is AI and what is deepfake, and the unethical part of those two things. And also we discussed in different sectors, like film industry and what is going on in digital platforms. Also, we tried to highlight some civic use of AI. So the technology is there, but it depends who is using the technology and with what intention, right? So and we also discussed about some protective measures that can be taken. And I think it was a great discussion. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, these are things that are continue to be debated. I mean, the conversation changes week to week, month to month. I mean, there's all kinds of sort of new ways that these technologies are being used. I mean, the recent Andy Warhol documentary, and creating a kind of synthetic voice of Andy Warhol for the film is something that people are talking a lot right now. I mean, how deepfakes could perhaps influence fiction films, and sort of surface within the context of fiction films, as well as the kinds of civil society discussions that we just had about digital forensics, or policy, or media literacy, things like that. So deepfakes are definitely part of a much broader conversation about the sort of role of AI and society, and what it means for media. But I don't think it's going to be going away anytime soon. I think especially AI, it's it has the kind of status of social fact at this point. It's just going to be a question of the ways in which it's used, regulated, critiqued, engaged with, and these are going to be the kinds of things we're going to see going forward.
Yeah. So thank you again, and
thank you.
Here we are concluding the conversation. See you again in person.
Yes, see you soon. Thank you.
Bye for now. Bye.